Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Congregational Church's online service. My name is Tom. I'm the pastor of this church in downtown Regensburg, and we are in the midst of a series called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And we are traveling through some passages from Luke that Jesus is trying to teach us how to treat our neighbor. Today we're going to be in a passage from Luke chapter 9. That really digs in and exposes some prejudice in human hearts and some animosity. So to better understand the passage itself, because the passage has some weird responses from Jesus, we can do a little bit of a history lesson real quick, because the history is what's going to make this thing come alive for us. We got to know, what's going on. So let's rewind. 1450 BC. That was a long time ago. That was like 2000 plus 1450. That's like 3,450 years ago. Long time ago. Well, the people of God left Egypt following Moses. They went out into the wilderness to worship God on Mount Sinai. And then 40 years of that, they conquer the Promised Land. So by 1400, they are an established nation. 50 years later, they have a king, and they're officially like a world power on a political stage. Not bad for a short period of time. So what happens is that the Hebrew people, they go through a civil war, and they split over north and south. So there's northern Israel and southern Judea. So the 12 tribes all divide up amongst themselves there. And it's over taxes. They didn't want to pay taxes. So that's civil war was over taxes on this one. And labor abuse. They didn't like the king and everything. And then this northern global power called Assyria, they came down and they invaded the northern tribes of Israel. And they actually conquered them in 722, and they deported many of those people to their land of Syria. And then the remaining people, they attempted to kind of blend and do like this hybrid Hebrew-Assyrian culture kind of a thing for those who remain. But those who really wanted to maintain their religious roots, their cultural roots, and who held on to those things like their Torah teachings and all that, they became known as the Samaritans. Popular name there, the Good Samaritan. That's next week. The Samaritans, their name actually means guardians or keepers, and they believe themselves to be the guardians and keepers of the true religion that was given by God to Abraham and Moses. However, the southern Judeans, they believed themselves to be the true keepers of the pure religion, and thus animosity started to form between the two groups, especially around geography. Samaritans believed the true place to worship God was on Mount Gerizim, which was in their territory. Sounds convenient. And the Judeans believed that the true place to worship God was in Jerusalem. It was in their territory. Again, convenient. And both groups built temples of worship in these locations. Eventually, the Babylonians came and invaded the southern Judeans, sent them off into exile, and then they came back and rebuilt their temple. Then the Greeks came to town. And they wanted to standardize everything into one culture, one worship, one religion, and all centered around this guy named King Antiochus, which was their god and their king. But the Jews revolted. They didn't want anything to do with it. And seeking help from the northern Samaritans, they actually washed their hands of it. And they told the Greeks, we're actually not Jewish, so you just leave us out of this deal. And the Greeks eventually were fended off by the Judeans under the Maccabean revolts, and they rededicated their temple. And then a group of Judeans led by a man named John Hyrcanus invaded Samaria and destroyed towns and their beloved temple along the way. So hatred brewed in their hearts, and in retaliation, a band of Samaritans around the time of Christ's birth then invaded the Jerusalem temple, and they scattered human bones around, desecrating it. And thus the hatred between these two people was growing over time and was solidified. So in today's passage, this hatred is on full display. Jesus sets out for Jerusalem and makes his way through Samaria, and one of the towns will not receive him because they hear he's on his way to Jerusalem. We don't think that's right. We don't like that. So the disciples ask if they should call fire down from heaven to consume the entire town. Not bad, Jesus rebukes them. And then the second part of this passage, Jesus is walking, and it's like, this is what is going to be required if you want to follow me. And 3 people come out of the woodwork, and they want to follow Christ. And one wants to bid his family goodbye. Another wants to bury his father first. Seems like reasonable requests, but Jesus is very strict and says, no, if you want to follow me, do it now. And then leaves him in the dust, basically. Kind of sounds a little insensitive, but we're going to dive into what's actually going on with that. So let's take a reflective pause for a moment. Hear a psalm told by my favorite poet, modern day poet, Malcolm Guite, before we dive into this passage.
A Goodly Heritage, my response to Psalm 16 by Malcolm Guite. Then help me step by step, my guide and friend. Preserve me, O my God, in whom I trust. My other goods are nothing in the end. How quickly they decay, how swiftly rust. But through it all, you stay and comfort me, my one abiding joy when all the rest have flown so suddenly. For now I see my true inheritance. Now I look up and find you still beside me, showing me the path of life. In your right hand, the cup of blessings full to overflowing. Your left hand upholds me still, gives me hope. I have goodly heritage. You pour on me your graces. Undeserved, you raise and comfort me until I fall no more.
Okay, as we've explored already, the Samaritans and the Hebrews had a tense relationship with one another, steeped in centuries of hatred and prejudice. Now, the land of the Samaritans was located sandwiched in between the northern Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his time, and southern Judea. So when the time came for the northern Hebrews of Galilee to travel to Jerusalem, many would just head east before they headed south, and they would go all the way around Samaria. Not only because they hated Samaritans, but because the Samaritans returned that hatred with a lack of hospitality. Now, in modern times, we have infrastructure of hotels and motels, restaurants, gas stations, drive-thrus, and even now we got Airbnbs. When we travel, we rely upon this infrastructure in some capacity to get us where we're going. In the ancient Near East, none of these things existed. Obviously, gas stations weren't around, but they didn't have an infrastructure of hospitality like we do. And travelers relied solely upon the hospitality of the towns that they were traveling through, of the local people. And there are actually many laws in the Old Testament that require people dwelling in the land to show hospitality to those referred to as aliens or sojourners or pilgrims. So for a town to reject the traveler, food, water, and a place to stay for the night, was to turn them out into the desert. This was rough Middle Eastern wilderness desert, to face the brutal elements of the wild all by themselves. So it's akin to them saying, go and die, we don't care. So it says that Jesus sends messengers ahead of him to announce his arrival into a certain Samaritan village. And this was something like a prominent person would do, like a king, a governor, or the Messiah. And so the town could make sure the roads were suitable for travel and the people were ready to receive a visit from an important person. So basically Jesus said, the Messiah is coming to visit you. But it says that they did not welcome or receive his traveling party. And the reason that they reject him, the sole reason, is because he is traveling to, of all places, Jerusalem. Now this was the hot topic, polarizing issue among them. Where is the correct place of worship, Mount Gerizim or Jerusalem? And they fought and killed one another over this issue. And this is something that we all today still do. Sometimes we look at a person and we just categorize them according to what we see, which is normal. Everybody does that. But when we raise or lower their value based on how like us they are, we do what the Bible calls judge another. Someone has a certain political bumper sticker, and we are drawn or repelled, and we place a value higher or lower on that person. Are they worth compassion? Are they worth attention? Are they worth human decency? We do this when we see a skin color, certain attire, like a car type, when we hear of their job, their economic status, education level, sexuality, age, religion, mental or emotional capacities. And we place them into a bucket of worthiness. We hear like what is important to the person, where they stand on hot topics of our day, and then we make a call. I cannot show you decency, love, or attention, or I can. Now, this is not saying that we need to give proximity, intimacy, and vulnerability with just anybody. This is not to say we shouldn't have like boundaries, operate in wisdom. This isn't even saying that we shouldn't make a judgment call on someone else's trustworthiness, because trust isn't given freely. Trust is earned by its nature. This is a time to reflect and exercise wisdom, asking, why do I want to trust these folks and not those folks? Do I discriminate against who is worth love merely because, like in this passage, they're walking to that place over there and I don't want to have anything to do with them? Okay, to turn the disciples out for the night was pretty much the same as saying, we hope you die out in the wilderness. So you can hear the indignation in the disciples' words as they ask Jesus, Lord, you want us to come, like command fire to fall from heaven and consume these people? Okay, my question is, why do they even think they have not only the ability, but authority to do that? Like, that's not something that they've done before. And all of a sudden, they just want to call fire down from heaven and consume an entire city. Now, it was just three chapters ago that Jesus gave the teaching that said to love your enemies and do not judge others. So if you look at the actions of Jesus in Luke thus far, he's showing similarities to another spiritual giant in their tradition, Mr. Elijah. Now, the opening story from 2 Kings has this king, Ahaziah. He was the king of the northern territories called Israel. And he fell through a lattice in his upper chamber in Samaria, of all places. And he becomes paralyzed. And he's in bed wondering if he's ever going to walk again. And he gets this idea. And he says, I'm going to send messengers to the nation of Ekron and ask their god, Baal, also known as Baal-zebub, if I will ever walk again. Now, Elijah, the prophet, the great prophet, he receives word from an angelic messenger that this is the king's plan. So he intercepts the party, and Elijah asks the party, do we not have a God here in our nation to ask? Why are you headed to talk with Baal? Therefore, you will die in that bed, Ahaziah. So that's what Elijah tells this messenger group. So they return to their king with Elijah's message. Sorry, you're going to die in there. Now, surprised to see them back so early, he asks why. They give him the message. And he's like, what sort of man was that guy that sent you this message? And their response is really funny. A hairy guy with a leather belt. That's literally what it says. A hairy guy with a leather belt. You can hear like the audible sigh in the king's next words. Oh, it's Elijah the Tishbite. Elijah the Tishbite. So he knows this guy. He's famous. He did like this big dramatic showdown with the prophets of Baal. He went toe-to-toe with Ahab and Jezebel, the two most infamous rulers of Judah. So he sends this military battalion of 50 as messengers to Elijah, saying, O man of God, the king says, come down. But Elijah answers the captain, if I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. And then fire came down from heaven and consumed him and the 50. So the king sends another battalion of 50, and the same dialogue happens, and the same outcome happens. Fire came down and consumed 50 people. So the king sent a third round of 50, but that guy is like shaking in his boots. And he pleads for his life. So Elijah decides to go with this guy and not call fire down from heaven. And he goes and he visits the king and he gives him the message. And the king dies in his bed, just like Elijah said. And they lived happily ever after. Not really. The Old Testament stories can be really weird. I mean, they are old. They're older than old. Now, since Jesus has done so many similar things that Elijah did, and they are thinking him another great prophet like Elijah, so far it seems logical for the disciples to think that fire from heaven upon the Samaritans was next, because that's what happened in Elijah's day. He did it. But calling down fire to consume your enemies, Jesus knows, scorches the land you want to win over. So when you want to win that argument, so you wield that fiery insult, when you need to win that debate so bad so you make them look dumb in front of others, when you give the cold, silent treatment to someone until they do what you want, all these are ways that we burn our opponents. And we may win in the way that we want, but we both leave that interaction scorched, wounded, cynical, angry, and bent on revenge. And as Gandhi says, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. So we have enough blindness. What we need is more compassionate justice exercised in this world. That's what Jesus is trying to get us to see through this passage. And he's raising the bar from what Elijah did. All right, the next section has a collection of 3 people who desire to follow Jesus, but who don't make the cut. And one of them just comes out of the blue and just says, Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. But then Jesus responds saying, yeah, but I don't have a home. And then Jesus gives an invitation to another saying, hey, you follow me. And the guy says, sure, but let me go bury my father first. Now that seems like a pretty legit ask, right? But Jesus replies something really, it was like really hard for me to wrestle with this one. He says, let the dead bury their dead. As for you, go proclaim the kingdom of God. Dang, Jesus, that was kind of harsh. Let the dead bury their dead. The guy just wants to go bury his father. What's wrong with that? Now, before we cast judgment on the harshness of Jesus' response, it is good to acknowledge that our cultures are very different, and Jesus might be saying something different than what it sounds like, because of the cultural difference. So my question was, here, that gave me a clue, was in a culture with no embalming practices, what is this guy doing out and about while his dead father is at home unburied? There must be something different going on. You wouldn't just leave a body open to the elements. You had to take care of that same day. So I read this paper by Dr. Nguyen, professor of New Testament studies from Catholic Theological Union, on the burial practices of this culture, and that seemed to shed some light on this. So here's what he says. He says this: Jews in first century Palestine promptly buried the dead within the same day. See, my question was, why was he doing out and about if he's not, if his father's at home unburied? Now, during the first few days after burial, family members of the deceased were expected to observe the mourning ritual. Mourning as in like a mourning the dead, and to remain at home to receive the condolences of relatives and friends. So if this guy needs to bury his father, why isn't he at home doing it? And the answer comes in the next stage of the burial process. It's called second burial. Yeah, they do this twice. Once the body has been fully decomposed down to bones, yuck, the family would gather the bones up and place them in a little box called an ossuary. And then they would place that box within the family tomb that ensured their place with their ancestors in the afterlife. So that's second burial. After it was all decomposed, they put him in a little box, and then they move him and put him in the big family. And that, now you're in the afterlife and all good. That took place 1 year after. But my question is, who can afford a family tomb? I mean, that's got to be some rich stuff going on there. So Dr. Nguyen goes on and says, since ossuaries were mainly used in rock-cut tombs, and since rock-cut tombs were only available for the wealthy, the practice was not for the masses, but primarily for the wealthier members of the Jewish society. It primarily served as a fashion statement to enhance the social status of the wealthy class. Jesus' response directly and uncompromisingly challenged the would-be disciple to renounce all forms of wealth and prestige that promoted a privileged social status. Well, that sheds a little bit more light on this. It's the second burial, not the first burial. It's been a year since his father's died, and they're going to go and do this social exercise that places the father with the ancestors, and it's all about exercising your wealth in front of other people. This social status thing going on here is seen in the other two responses when they want to call and follow Jesus, and he says no. And they bookend this one. He's saying, I don't have a home, so go. And the other one is saying, let me first go say farewell to my home. Now, these are not a denial of love and family, because those are deeply rooted in the Ten Commandments even. But it's an attempt to untangle the social elite from the powers that oppress the world, which he's going to dismantle in Jerusalem during his passions. So this is it's a grace, even though it doesn't sound like a grace to our ears. He's attempting to untangle them from the things that are holding them and the whole world down. So much of the way we label others as friends or enemies has been taught by our social upbringing and our tribes of affiliation. Like your news channel will tell you what other news channels are full of junk, right? And they're your enemy. Your political figure will tell you what other political figures are full of junk, and they're your enemy. Your religion is going to tell you which religion is right and which are a threat. And on it goes. These label-making classifications of other humans are based upon power structures and value systems that are broken. And we don't need to hold on to them anymore. Christ has disarmed the powers of the world. There is neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female. All of these social status that Paul wrote about in Galatians. And basically what we are now free to do, we are free to love one another and tear down the systems of injustice that prevent love from happening. Go love your neighbor.
I Will Remember, a response to Psalm 77 by Malcolm Guite. As heaven's mercy falls like gentle rain, I lift my face and let it wash me clean. In all my times of trouble, darkness, pain, I cry to him. I come to him and lean again into the comfort of his grace. And I remember that all that he has been to me in all my years of life, I trace once more the story of his love. He sought me even when I turned my face away from him, descended from above, and found me in my hiding place. His might broke up my clouds of darkness, and he strove against the waves of chaos in the night of my affliction, when he rescued me and led me out of darkness into light.
Well, thank you so much for joining us online today in this digital space, and I hope you found a little bit of hope, help, and healing for your day. Stay tuned for some fun blooper reels that are going to follow this recording, because I was drinking my coffee and spilling it over myself. And I'm not perfect, and I mess up a lot, and that's fun to laugh at. So join me in laughing at me. If you found this service helpful and you want to you identify with the spirit of the teachings here, then there's some ways that you can partner with us and join our community. You can like our Facebook page or Instagram page or subscribe on YouTube, and you can see all of the stuff that we post there. If you're an exile from the faith community and you have not found a spiritual home yet, you can join us in whatever capacity you can and belong with us, and that would be cool. If you find yourself in a dark night of the soul or a deconstruction process because of this, we offer actually one-on-one spiritual direction with me here, trained spiritual director, and I guide you through the dark. I have been there. So if you'd like to partner with us financially, we would appreciate any level of giving that you are able to do, and there's a couple of ways that you can give. They're on your screen. there's a website there, and they keep these services going. And yeah, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you throughout the week. And cheers, all friends. Very hot, and I have my glowing. Why is it glowing? Everything's glowing. Camera, hold on, my camera's all funky. Feel the caffeine. Oh, I just spilled my coffee. So this is seen in both responses. That this is the bookend. Okay.